Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Spain has reported nearly 1,800 COVID-19 cases overnight, marking the biggest jump since a national lockdown was lifted in June. Over in Brazil, 1,437 people have died, while more than 57,000 have tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded 727 cases and 21 deaths overnight, raising the fatalities toll to 6,035. Globally, the virus has claimed over 706,000 lives and infected more than 18.7 million people. Pakistan's army says one of its soldiers has been martyred in firing from across the border with Afghanistan. It said 2 soldiers were also wounded in the incident in the Dir district. Eight COVID-19 patients have died in a fire in the intensive care ward of a private hospital in India's western city of Ahmedabad. The police say the primary cause of the fire appears to be a short circuit. The US says it will put forward a resolution in the UN Security Council next week to extend the arms embargo on Iran. Speaking to reporters, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will ensure that the arms embargo is extended. The arms ban is currently set to end on October 18th under Tehran's 2050 nuclear deal with world powers. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. For now, the news in detail. Spain has reported nearly 1,800 COVID-19 cases overnight, marking the biggest jump since a national lockdown was lifted in June. Over in Brazil, 1,437 people have died, while more than 57,000 have tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed over 707,000 lives and infected more than 18.8 million people. More details in this report.
The coronavirus appears to be setting its sights back to Europe, with the second wave surging in many countries. Spain's COVID-19 cases are on the rise again, with Sweden following other regional countries to impose travel restrictions on Madrid. Germany has issued a travel warning for parts of Belgium following a surge in infections. The Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis too has warned of reimposing restrictions if the spike in cases does not halt. While returning restrictions threaten to extend economic slowdown, COVID-led manufacturing, including masks and protective gear, is booming.
Our biggest export market would be the US. Our products are used in many hospitals in the US. Many hospitals have shown their appreciation through emails thanking us for our products. We are very happy that our efforts in research and development has been a success. Secondly, we also export to Canada, Japan and South Korea.
Brazil reports the second highest number of cases and deaths in the world as authorities struggle to get the outbreak under control. Despite the US leading the world tally of infections and deaths, President Donald Trump is pressing to open schools.
Children handle it very well, and they may get it, but they get it, and it doesn't have much of an impact on them. And if you look at the numbers of in terms of mortality, fatality, the numbers for children under a certain age, meaning young, their immune systems are very, very strong. They're very powerful, and they seem to be able to handle it very well. And that's according to every statistic.
Meanwhile, in Asia, mainland China and South Korea have still not been able to eliminate local transmission of the virus. China has recorded 37, while South Korea reported 43 infections overnight.
In India now, COVID-19 continues to wreak havoc as the country recorded over 56,000 cases in a single day, becoming the virus epicenter of South Asia. The country's total number of infections is approaching 2 million. Government statistics show the death toll has now climbed to 40,699 with 904 fatalities overnight. Maharashtra is the worst hit state with over 460,000 cases and nearly 16,500 deaths. Tamil Nadu, too, is reeling from the virus with over 273,000 cases and almost 4,500 deaths. While Andhra Pradesh has once again crossed 10,000 daily COVID-19 cases with 77 deaths. These alarming statistics present a monstrous challenge for India's already overwhelmed healthcare system and troubled economy. While in Pakistan, 21 more people have died from the new coronavirus in the last 24 hours, raising the total to 6,035. The Health Ministry said 727 cases were reported overnight as the tally near 282,000. The ministry said over 256,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said there are now nearly 20,000 active cases in the country, among which 809 are critical. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 122,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 94,000 cases. The U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee has expressed concerns to India over its brutal siege of occupied Kashmir. This comes a year after India illegally annexed the valley, stripped it of its UN-recognized status and imposed an inhumane clampdown. In a letter, the committee refuted New Delhi's claims that conditions in the occupied valley have returned to normal. Earlier, a member of the same committee, David Trone, called on India to guarantee the human rights of Kashmiris in the occupied valley. Trone's statement read, "Lack of internet has prevented Kashmiris from accessing the information on COVID-19 and hampered healthcare services." Now, Pakistan has thanked members of the UN Security Council, especially China, for holding the third meeting on Indian-occupied Kashmir in a year. The meeting coincided with the first anniversary of the revocation of the valley's special status. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says India's gross human rights violations remain a grave concern for the international community. Qureshi said the meeting rebuts India's claims that Jammu and Kashmir is an internal matter. He said it further reaffirms the validity of UN resolutions on the Kashmiris' right to self-determination through an impartial plebiscite. Pakistan's Foreign Office has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to protest ceasefire violations by India along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said India forces are continuously targeting civilians from across the line of control. This follows the martyrdom of an 18-year-old girl and injuries to 6 people in unprovoked Indian firing in the Hot Springs sector. Indian troops have committed nearly 1,900 ceasefire violations this year so far. The Foreign Office said that Indian side was called upon to respect the 2003 ceasefire understanding. Meanwhile, Pakistan's army says a soldier has been martyred in firing from across the border with Afghanistan. It said 2 soldiers were also wounded in the incident in the Dir district. Last month, Afghan forces opened unprovoked firing at civilians gathered on the Pakistani side of border in Chaman. Pakistan's Foreign Office said the incident resulted in several casualties and serious damage to infrastructure. Over to Afghanistan, where the Taliban say Kabul's decision to convene a Grand Assembly of Elders to decide the fate of 400 inmates has no legal grounds. In a statement, the Taliban said all factions should avoid creating obstacles to the peace process. Under the Doha peace deal, the Afghan government is required to free 5,000 Taliban prisoners as a precondition to intra-Afghan talks. President Ashraf Ghani's government has released all but 400, saying their crimes were too grave. However, the Taliban insist upon the release of all prisoners before the start of peace talks. Meanwhile, Taliban's deputy leader Mullah Baradar Akhand has discussed the peace process with UN's envoy to Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons. The 2 officials stress on the need to finalize the prisoner release process. In India, 8 coronavirus patients have died in a fire in the intensive care ward of a private hospital in the western city of Ahmedabad. The police say the primary cause of the fire appears to be a short circuit. Emergency services say the blaze spread when a medical staffer's personal protective equipment caught fire. Medics said 3 women were among those dead. Rescue officials said around 40 other coronavirus patients at the facility were rescued and shifted to another hospital. Gujarat State Chief Minister Vijay Rupani has ordered a probe into the incident. The US says it will table a resolution in the UN Security Council next week to extend the arms embargo on Iran. Speaking to reporters, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will ensure that the ban is extended. Pompeo said the proposal to extend the ban on Iran is eminently reasonable. He said the Security Council will make a mockery of its mission if it allows Tehran to buy and sell weapons openly. The arms ban is currently set to end on October 18th under Iran's 2015 nuclear deal with world powers. The US drafted resolution needs at least 9 votes in favor to force Russia and China to use their vetoes. If it's unsuccessful, the US has threatened to reimpose all UN sanctions on Iran under a process agreed in the 2015 deal. Moving on, China has called to resume dialogue over the South China Sea, saying the water should not become a wrestling ground for international politics. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says Beijing sees the energy-rich waters as a shared home for countries in the region. Wang said the US should stop its provocative actions and blatant interference in the territorial disputes in the sea. He said Washington is trying to drive a wedge between China and ASEAN nations to serve its domestic politics and geopolitical agenda. Wang urged regional countries to remain vigilant and preserve hard-won peace.
Facts have proved that settling disputes through dialogue is the right way that best serves the interests of regional countries, and countries in the region have a shared responsibility to keep the South China Sea peaceful and stable. Under the current situation, China proposes that we remove all disturbances to restart as soon as possible the Code of Conduct consultation and agree as early as possible on a set of rules for maintaining long-term peace and stability in the region.
Meanwhile, the US says it wants to remove untrusted Chinese tech apps from American app stores, alleging significant threats to data security. In a media briefing, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the apps contribute to Beijing's content censorship and surveillance apparatus. Pompeo said federal agencies will collaborate to limit the ability of Chinese cloud service providers to collect, store, and process data. He said it was crucial to restrict the cloud-based systems run by Chinese firms Alibaba, Baidu, China Mobile, China Telecom, and Tencent. The top US diplomat said the government was doing its utmost to protect personal and intellectual property, including critical vaccine research. Pompeo called upon like-minded nations to collaborate and join a clean global network to protect sensitive information.
We're working to ensure that the CCP can't compromise information carried by the undersea cables that connect our country and others to the global internet. Huawei Marine significantly underbids other companies on multiple procurements to connect Asia, the Pacific, Africa, and Europe using Chinese state-backed undersea technology. We can't allow that to continue. We call on all freedom-loving nations and companies to join the clean network.
More news to follow after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Palestine has called on the international community to sanction Israel over its rights violations in the Palestinian territories. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Palestine condemns the Israeli expansion and colonial ambitions in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The ministry said Israel has been confiscating Palestinian lands and demolishing homes. Earlier in the day, the Israeli authorities demolished 3 more Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, a UN report said Israel had demolished 30 constructions in the West Bank and East Jerusalem during the past 2 weeks. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said the demolitions led to the displacement of 25 people. Now, in Lebanon, a 2-week state of emergency has been declared in Beirut after a massive explosion on Tuesday left 135 people dead and over 5,000 injured. The cause of the explosion remains unclear, but officials have linked the blast to ammonium nitrate being stored in a warehouse at the port. The government has also decided to place port officials under house arrest and approved an allocation of funds around $13 million to deal with the crisis. The blast has displaced up to 300,000 people as rescue officials continue their search for dozens of people trapped under the debris. Meanwhile, United States Defense Secretary has defied President Donald Trump's claim of the incident being an attack. Esper said most people believe the devastating blast that rocked Lebanon's capital was an accident. Now, Japan is marking 75 years since the world's first atomic bomb eviscerated Hiroshima as attendees prayed for victims in scaled-back ceremonies. Hiroshima Mayor Kazumi Matsui has urged the world to unite and warned against the nationalism that led to the Second World War. 75 years on, the gaping wounds are yet to heal, and the hopes of a world free of nuclear weapons remains a distant dream. More details in this report.
On that fateful morning of the 6th of August 1945, the US dropped the nuclear bomb nicknamed Little Boy on the city. Around 140,000 people were instantly killed, while several perished in the following months due to radiation sickness, fatal burns, and other injuries. Merely 3 days after the Hiroshima attack, the US dropped another atomic bomb on Nagasaki in southern Japan, killing another 74,000 people. 6 days later, Japan surrendered, ending World War II. The annual event is held to commemorate the unprecedented nuclear aggression while underscoring the dwindling number of survivors, known as hibakusha. Most of the hibakusha have kept alive the memory of bombings and dedicated their lives to campaign for a ban on nuclear weapons. Terumi Tanaka, who was a 13-year-old student at the time, says their activism has taken on an increasing level of urgency as they age.
I do think the world is slowly moving to a world without nuclear weapons, but when I compare the speed of this movement to the speed of us aging and dying, I think the pace of us dying is faster. After all the atomic bomb survivors are gone, I'm worried if people will be able to really understand what we have experienced.
The US has never apologized, while some historians argue the bombing saved more lives by ending the war and stopping a land invasion. But decades later, the Japanese widely consider the attacks as war crimes for indiscriminately targeting civilians.
Now over to Somalia, where 8 soldiers have been killed and several wounded in an attack on a military base in southwestern Bay province. A government spokesperson says the terrorists attacked a National Army base in Dainune. The spokesman said that an army commander was among those killed in the attack. Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack via the internet. He added that after the attack, a military vehicle carrying reinforcements was targeted in a roadside blast, wounding several soldiers. A military official said that more than 6 Al-Shabaab fighters were also killed in fierce fighting with the Somali army. The US has imposed sanctions on a Zimbabwean businessman who is also an advisor to President Emmerson Mnangagwa. In a statement, the Treasury Department said it blacklisted Kudakwashe Dagwiri and a Zimbabwe-based company owned or controlled by him. It also accused Dagwiri of using his relationship with President Mnangagwa to grow his business empire dramatically. The Treasury said the businessman has used his state contacts to gain contracts. Deputy Treasury Secretary Justin said the US supports the economic well-being of the Zimbabwean people. He said Washington will target corrupt acts and graft by Zimbabwean politicians and their finances. Meanwhile, in Turkey, thousands of women have taken to the streets of several cities to protest against gender-based violence. They demand the country remain a signatory to a 2011 Council of Europe accord against such attacks. The protests were spurred by an online campaign in the wake of the brutal killing of a female student in the southwestern province of Mughla. President Tayyip Erdogan's ruling AK party officials say they are considering opting out of the pact designed for stronger women's rights. The remarks have alarmed campaigners who see the Istanbul Convention as key to combating rising domestic violence. Many conservatives in Turkey say the pact is counterproductive as it encourages violence by undermining family structures. The death toll from the tropical storm Isaias has risen to 8 as it continues to ravage U.S. Atlantic coast with rain and fierce winds. Officials said one woman died in Pennsylvania when her vehicle was overtaken by water and swept downstream. 2 people were killed by falling trees in Connecticut and Delaware, while a woman was found dead inside New Hampshire house. Electric supply companies said the storm left over 2.8 million homes and businesses without power from New York to North Carolina. The tornado suspended regional rail service in Philadelphia and New Jersey, and the Interstate 676 highway was also closed. U.S. National Hurricane Center said the maximum sustained winds of 105 kilometers per hour went down to 64 kilometers per hour. A massive fire in more than 20 warehouses of wholesale markets in Najaf, Iraq. Iraqi officials say firefighters are working on site to put out the blaze. Meanwhile, a large inferno broke out at a market in Ajman. Police said the fire has been brought under control. Fortunately, both fires did not cause any casualties. All European stocks have declined. Investors are monitoring a slew of corporate earnings and the Bank of England's decision to leave interest rates unchanged. London's FTSE slumped well over 1%, while Paris's CAC 40 lost over 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX2 is trading on or below the flat line. Earlier, stocks in the Asia-Pacific traded mixed as investors continued to watch tensions between the US and China with concern. Hong Kong's Hang Seng and Japan's Nikkei 225 dipped, while Seoul's Kospi and Australia's ASX 200 gained. Mainland Chinese shares traded mixed. And with that, we come to the end of the bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.